This is your Kick-Ass Life podcast, episode number 118 with guest Amy Pearson. All links and resources you hear on this podcast can be found by going to yourkickasslife.com/118.
This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast with Andrea Owen, a no BS guide to self-help and badassery. Because ladies, let's face it, life's too short for it to not kick ass. And here's your host, the girl who serves it up straight with a side of crazy, Andrea Owen.
Hey, ass kickers. Welcome to another edition of the podcast. And as always, I'm so excited that you're here and I'm so excited to tell you about today's guest and get into the topic. But before we get into it, I just wanted to give you a heads up about a special series I'm rolling out for the podcast that starts the last week of September. So you'll still get your regular episode every Wednesday, but for 10 weeks, starting on September 27th, I'm rolling out episodes on sobriety and recovery. So again, this is in addition to our regularly scheduled Wednesday episodes. You're going to get another episode every Tuesday. So these episodes are for anyone who has gotten sober, who struggles with an addiction, more specifically with alcoholism, who's thinking they might have a problem with drinking but aren't sure, or even none of those things are you, but maybe you want a better understanding of what it's like for someone you care about who's in that position so you can better support them. So if you're sure you don't want to miss those episodes, you can get on my email list and get those delivered to your inbox by simply texting the word kick-ass, that's all one word, to 444999. Again, that's the word kick-ass to 444999. I'll be interviewing all kinds of people on the topic, and I can't wait to share it with you. And switching gears a little bit, I wanted to give you a quick kind of teaser snippet of what you will be hearing next week to get you excited and make sure that you tune in to that episode. So here you go. Because essentially when you're not doing any of the work, you're saying like, that sounds good, but probably later or for someone else. And again, that might come back to you not being ready. And I think that you are the one who understands that either you're using that as a cop-out or you really truly aren't ready. And I'll be honest with you, I think that the people that aren't ready are the people that don't know they're not ready. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that unconscious place of being where you just literally, and I hate using that word, but you literally aren't there yet. You are just not in that place where you can actually do the work and you don't know that you're not. But the people who are consciously thinking to themselves, I'm just not ready to do that work, I kind of call bullshit on that. Because I think that you might be ready. I think that you might just be afraid. I think that the thought of doing the work is just so incredibly painful and daunting. But just check yourself. Check yourself before you wreck yourself in that situation. So stay tuned for that episode, which comes out next Wednesday. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today, Amy Pearson. Today's guest, Amy Pearson, she's a repeat guest. She's my friend and colleague and the founder of livebrazen.com. She is a master certified Martha Beck life coach, a coach mentor, and instructor for Martha Beck's life coach training. She's a teacher, coach, writer, and speaker, a formal approval addict with the occasional relapse. She's now addicted to success. Her mission is nothing short of world peace by empowering every heart-centered entrepreneur to magnify their tribe, make great money, and an impact while doing their unique thing in the world. She is a gifted courage infuser who helps entrepreneurs embrace the discomfort zone. I love that. In honor of their true work in the world. So without further ado, here is Amy. Hey there, ass kickers. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. And I am joined here for the second time, part two, with Miss Amy Pearson. Thank you for coming on, Amy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's your second time, and we will link back to the other podcast episode that we did together. It's already been more than 2 years since you've been on. It feels like, it's been like maybe like a month or something. I know time flies.
Right, I know.
But you are the queen of talking about approval addiction, and that's where I want to start with you. So we talked a lot about that in the other episode we did together, but for anyone that may have missed it, how would someone know that they struggle here?
Well, it is a tricky one, right? Because unlike other addictions where there are really clear negative consequences that show up pretty quickly. So, for example, if you drink too much, there's a hangover. If you smoke, you smell bad. If you shop too much, you've got debt. STDs if you're sleeping around. But with approval issues and approval addiction, which I do see it as addiction, so a habitual thing that we do despite negative consequences. But again, it's tricky because a lot of times when you are addicted to trying to control how other people see you and think about you and respond to you, usually what happens is you get praise, or at the very least, you're not rocking the boat. So this is kind of why I see myself as someone who's really on an awareness raising crusade. And so what happens though, when you are spending your time sort of obsessed with whether or not you're being validated, or on the other side of that coin, whether or not someone is going to judge you or leave you out or reject you, what happens is you end up creating a life that doesn't fit you. And so you end up surrounding yourself with people that don't get you, or you end up working in a job where, you feel like you're swimming upstream. And this is, by the way, why a lot of us feel like a fraud. It's because, we're acting like a fraud in our lives.
Oh, yeah. So wait, let me back up a little bit, because maybe I should have started here. So can you explain to people what is the difference between, because when I wrote my book, I did a chapter about people pleasing and approval addiction, because I think that there is a distinction between the two.
Yeah.
So how would you explain the two?
I think that people pleasing is one way that it manifests.
Yes.
But I think that there's the deeper issue, and I really see that a lot of the stuff that we struggle with, if we really got down to it, if we really dug deep enough, it has to do with this fear of isolation, of a fear of social exclusion. And that's because, we survive. Traditionally, it is a very primal need. Like if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like feeling safe is right there just above like needing to drink water. Right. And so if we're feeling left out, if we're feeling like someone's rejecting us, we don't feel safe. If we don't feel good enough, if we're not being validated, we don't feel safe. And so it will show up in all kinds of ways. So it can show up as people pleasing. It can show up as sort of being that stereotypical doormat. But sometimes it can even look like the opposite. So I've created a personality quiz where you could learn what your approval-seeking personality type is. And one of the types is hater. And the hater is someone who would sort of proactively reject before they got rejected. So, there are different ways that it could show up. Like, I am married to a chameleon and, the chameleon is great at sort of blending in to their environment, and they might even pick up sound like someone in their social group, there's good and bad about all this. It's not to say that you're wrong or you're broken or you're damaged. My husband is a perfect example because he's worked through a lot of this stuff, but it's funny because we started playing tennis together and I played more than him, but all of the mistakes that he makes in his tennis game are because he learned them from me. So he's like a sponge. So anyway, to answer your question though, there are lots of ways that it can manifest. It's not just people pleasing. Perfectionism. Yeah. For me, I'm traditionally a performer. So I have, the way that I have throughout my life wanted to feel like I fit in, wanted to feel like I was loved, wanted to feel worthy was to achieve or to be the most entertaining in the room or to win a lot of awards. So I don't show up as necessarily a people pleaser in this sort of traditional way that you might think about it. And that, by the way, is what I would call in my quiz a helper. It's someone who really is trying to make themselves useful or never says no so that she or he can feel like they're wanted, like they're needed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you explained, I know you and I have talked about this before. We are very similar in our personalities, and that's how I am too. I think it's interesting, what you call the hater sounds very similar to what I call the zero fucks mentality. And in my new book, I'm writing an entire chapter on that. And I see that a lot. I mean, we see those memes, about how to be unfuckwithable. And
right.
I can, and I get where it's coming from. It's I can fist pump to that. But I think that what happens is it becomes very black or white. People see it only as I'm either a doormat or I'm this badass who doesn't take shit from anybody, but you're still isolating.
Right. Right. You're creating what you fear because deep down, that's what we want is we want connection. We want to feel a sense of belonging. This is what we crave and it's very primal to us. But the problem is that we put up these facades, like for me, that facade of being like the smartest, most competent person in the room and really devoting my life to that. And what happens is then we surround ourselves with people who are having a relationship with that facade of us. And so we're not experiencing the true belonging. We never get that urge satisfied. And by the way, this is why I think that so many of us self-medicate with alcohol or other substances.
It's just that feeling. Yes. Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. And I love talking about this because I think it's so prevalent. And I think sometimes people hear the word people pleaser and they can't, I think a lot of people do identify as one, but then there's a lot of people who don't.
No,
they still really care about what other people think. So I think that you can have issues with approval, but not be a people pleaser for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the word, feeling like a fraud. So what does that mean to you? And how do you talk about that with your audience?
Well, so I think that there are different kinds of feeling like a fraud. I think there are different reasons, I should say. One I mentioned before, which is, I say this with love, but a lot of us do feel like a fraud because we are acting like a fraud. I mean, I have a story in my own life to kind of illustrate that. But when my mom was going through her treatments for cancer, I had been to every single one of her treatments, except for the day when I needed to finish this report. I was writing a report on the home mortgage interest rate deduction for a progressive think tank. And I really wanted to work for this think tank because my thing was that I wanted people to see me as really, really smart. And I thought, well, if I could be a research analyst for a think tank, and write reports for the Oregon legislator, then that would be it. That
sounds fancy.
Yeah, that's really fancy. And I would prove to them for once and for all, really to myself. But so this report was due, and the entire time that I was working for this organization, I felt like such a fraud because these were real policy wonks and I was pretending. And so it felt like I was swimming upstream and I was taking a long time to finish this report and I really cared what they thought of me. And so the very final day that my mom, well, it wasn't the final, I'll say more, but on the day that my mom had this treatment, I was supposed to finish this report. And so I remembered the conversation with her on the phone where I told her I couldn't make it that day. And I did end up finishing the report. That night, my dad found her in bed and she wasn't breathing. And long story short, she died of heart failure. And this is why I say that the stakes are so high, because we don't even get that we are creating this life. And in the process, we're missing things that are important to us. And so that's the kind of fraud where it's like you feel like you have to be someone else in your life and you feel like you're constantly swimming upstream because you're not being who you really are. For whatever reason, it's because you picked up on messages that the real you wasn't fit for human consumption. But that's one kind of fraud. Now, there's another kind of fraud that has more to do with sort of culturally, especially with women. We are not taught what it takes to really be successful in our life. It really does take discomfort. And for those of us with issues around addiction, we're used to creating comfort. We want everything to be comfortable in our lives. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to make any waves. We don't want anyone pissed off at us. We don't want to deal with that. And so we're so used to finding comfort, creating comfort, that anything that requires us to be successful doing our own thing requires us to get out of that comfort zone and to step up in a way that requires us to risk, requires us to fail, requires us to go out into places where we can't control and we can't predict the outcome. That's another area where, like, I can share in my own life when I was invited to train on behalf of Martha Beck's life coach training certification program. And all I wanted to do was say no. I wanted to say no so badly because I was terrified. And I remember the first day that I showed up as an instructor, to teach these life coach cadets, training cadets, the tools, I felt like I was going to throw up like the entire time. Mm-hmm. And that's just normal. But a lot of times we don't get that because we think there's something wrong with us if we feel that way. And so there are two different kinds of feeling like a fraud. And a lot of the class that I share is learning how to distinguish those, because there's different things that you do depending on what kind of fraud it is.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I hear that a lot. You know, I'm gathering stories for my book and I hear from these women, like I have so much experience and credentials and college degrees and certifications, but yet I still walk into work and feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm doing it wrong. I feel like one day everyone's just going to find out that I have no idea what I'm doing. Yeah. I see it with my clients too. And so you have like a free workshop, right? That people can attend. Yeah. Yeah. I Feel Like a Fraud. It's at ifeellikeafraud.com/Andrea, and people can sign up for that for free. Yeah. And tell us what will people learn in this workshop?
So we're going to talk about those two kinds of feeling like a fraud. I'm going to help you distinguish between them. A lot of the class does draw upon sort of this legacy that we have inherited as a culture, women, about sort of feeling. Why do we feel like why is this so common with women? So I address that. I speak to that, the cultural legacy around that. And then we talk about those two kinds of feeling like a fraud. I will help folks to distinguish between those, and I will help people to understand what their next steps need to be depending on what's showing up for them, what kind of feeling like a fraud is showing up for them.
Oh, that's great. Because you and I could talk for like a whole hour on that. We are going to move on from the topic. So if anyone's like, oh my God, please talk about that more, go to ifeellikeafraud.com/Andrea. The link is in the show notes. If you want an easier link to click on, just hop on over to the show notes. And thank you for putting that on for us.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
And all right. So we're shifting gears a little bit, everybody. And we're going to talk about, here's a little preamble. And this year marks my own 5-year anniversary in sobriety. And I have asked a select number of colleagues and friends that I have to come on and share their story and talk about sobriety and recovery. And Amy is one of those. And I would love, even if you are someone who has not struggled with alcoholism, I would love for you to stick around and listen and either share this episode with someone that you know that is struggling or you think that is struggling, or you may even walk away with some nuggets of your own life. Again, if you don't struggle with booze. So as I was saying, you're a sister in sobriety and recovery. So would you share with the listeners your story specifically of when you realized you had a problem with drinking?
Yeah. So it's been, it'll be 3 years in November. And by the way, on the date of when we're recording this, today is my dad's birthday. And
sober birthday?
Sober birthday, nice. And he has 37 years.
Wow.
So, and my mom would have had 37 years today. So this is very cool that we're doing this on this day. But yeah, so it'll be almost 3 years for me. So I have been doing a lot of my own work. So I've been I became a coach 7 years ago, and it has been a beautiful thing. There's been so much healing, but there is also the curse of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And what I realized, right? Like I was on to myself for many years, but it was sort of like this, do I have a problem sort of thing? And I was one of those who would like do the quizzes online and talk to my friends. And, my sister, who's also has many, many years of sobriety, she would tell me, you don't have a problem. I see how you drink, like you're fine. You don't have a problem. And so of course I like to drink. So it was much more convenient for me to just believe, my sister or my friends or the quiz.
So what were you doing? Were you like going out partying, or what did it look like?
So I have 3 kids, and they're twins. I have twins who are 8, and I have a 5-year-old. And I am not like someone who goes out and parties anymore. But for me, being someone who is highly sensitive and empathic, it was just a lot of stimulation, and also very introverted to have all this energy in my house and have all these people need me and have all this emoting everywhere.
So at that time, I'm thinking back, years ago, they were much littler.
Yeah.
And you were taking, they were in diapers, and it was a lot more like physical caregiving.
Yeah, it was really, really, really hard. And so the alcohol for me was this way for me to dull my senses, really, and I can't remember where I read this, but pull the blinds down. And it just started to get, it started to become a glass of wine, every so often, to a glass of wine every night, and then 2 glasses of wine, and then 3 glasses of wine. And then I started to think about having wine around 2:00. And it just, and being self-aware, I just started to see, and, also just having grown up in a household with, the traditional sort of ugly drunks, it was something that I did not want it to get to that point. And so, I didn't look like the stereotypical drunk on the street corner, but I also knew that this was progressing. And, there was this one experience where I remember I was at a park with a friend at an event, and we were going to have a picnic, and the kids were with us, and the park was being this event. Traditionally, we would drink wine. This year, there were people patrolling. I don't know if it were, law enforcement or something, saying we couldn't drink wine. And I was so disappointed. I was like, no way, I'm not going to have any fun. I have to drink the wine. And so I just kind of snuck the wine while those guys weren't looking and got pretty intoxicated, pretty inebriated.
So you were drinking by yourself, in secret at the party?
Well, my friend and I were in on it, but I drank and hid it from, the folks that were, telling us we weren't supposed to. And then I got pretty darn drunk. I remember my friend was asking me if I was okay to drive home because I had to drive the kids home. We had to cross the river. And, I was like, I'm fine. I just didn't want the inconvenience of having to deal with, having to get a ride or take a cab, or I had 3 kids. So I told her I was fine, but I really wasn't. And I was driving over bridges of bodies of water. And I remember it wasn't the next night or anything. It really was probably about a month or 2 after when I remembered that day, that night. And I thought to myself, if anything would have happened, this is going to make me cry. I would have never forgiven myself. And I know that I would have vowed never to have another drink again. And so I just became that person. I just decided that I wasn't going to wait until something happened. I was making that vow to that alternative reality where I did get in an accident. I did drive my car over the bridge. I killed my children. I became that person and made a decision that I wasn't going to wait, and I was just going to vow never to drink again. And so that was the decision that I made. This is actually the first time I've shared this story. I've written about it. I've never published it. I wrote about it once, but I never published it. So it'll be in the book. So that was really what I think was the thing that kind of made me decide to stop for good.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. And when you were telling it, I just had this pit in my stomach, and I can so relate to so many things you said, and starting with, finding out that you can't drink at that picnic. I mean, for me, I remember so looking forward to events where you could day drink and it was socially acceptable. Yeah. Things like Super Bowl parties or parades or, anybody's birthday party or holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, forget about it. We can start drinking at noon. I want that to be my everyday and have nobody raise an eyebrow. That's what I wanted every day. And so, and just, I think that, for anyone listening and what you said in that awareness piece and how you said, I forget what you said about, you said you knew that it was progressive. And I think, for those people that have never heard that before, is whether you can get on board with the term alcoholic, which I know is really hard for people. It's still even hard for me. I think whatever you want to call it, whatever this is that we're talking about, we don't get better. And I think that anyone that I have on this podcast, anyone that I've talked to who's in recovery, who's quit drinking, can tell you that we tried to get better. Wouldn't you say that you tried?
Yeah, I remember actually once my husband has some digestive issues and he had an attack and he decided he wasn't going to drink. And so in solidarity, I just stopped drinking for a month and I could do it. And then I remember, so we went out to dinner a month later and I decided, okay, I was just going to have a glass of wine. And I did. And that night, it was like, oh, this is no big deal. This didn't have I just thought it would have some charge or something. And I was like, oh, look at me. I'm normal. And then You know how this is going to go.
Well, I know how it's going to end up. But
like the next night I was like, oh, I'm just going to get some wine. And then what was amazing was how fast it started to go downhill. Yes. Like it was like my drinking like multiplied by 10 times, like the intensity that it had before I stopped for a month. That was really eye-opening for me.
Yes, to everything you just said. I remember for me, I went to a Super Bowl party, and again, it was just like my invitation to just get completely shit-faced. And my kids were little. I was even still nursing my daughter, and while drinking. I'd like to say I was, what did they call it? Pump and dump, but I didn't, which I still struggle with from a place of having tremendous amounts of shame around. Yeah. So we were at the Super Bowl party, and it was my friend that was hosting it. Her family's Italian, and not that all Italians do this, but they drink a lot of wine, really good wine. And I probably threw down 2 bottles that day. We went home, and I was just completely tanked and burst into tears that night and told my husband that I was pretty sure I needed to get sober. And it was completely out of left field because he wasn't totally aware of how much I was drinking, because at that point I was hiding it from him. And then I called my friend Courtney, who had at that time 10 years of sobriety, and told her, and thought it was going to be really dramatic, and it wasn't. And so she said, well, just quit for 30 days and see what happens. Mostly, and as a coach, this, it's not really about the action. It's about what happens with our thoughts and our feelings during the homework. And I made it 6 days and was just climbing the walls, white knuckling it, just fuck this. I can drink. I can, moderate, using air quotes. And then it was really similar to what you just said. I remember then when my 30-day trial didn't work out. My husband went this is when we were about to leave San Diego and we were going to move, and he went out of town for I don't remember, maybe a week or 10 days. And it was the first time I'd ever bought myself a box of wine. And it was party time for Andrea, because he was gone. He didn't travel when we lived in San Diego. He didn't travel for work, but he was gone for the first time. I didn't have to have, I was making up that he was watching how much I was drinking. I don't think he really was. He says he wasn't. And I got drunk every night by myself. I was with 2 small children. What would have happened if I needed to take one of them to the hospital? Or, I was just getting completely tanked every night. And it was like you were saying, the escalation was frightening. It was frightening how fast it was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing with me too, there are so many reasons why it was so difficult for me to identify that I had a problem. I think inside I knew, but just how much we see of, socially, how it's happening all the time around us. And I just had such a hard time accepting that I could have a problem, because I just didn't seem like I just didn't seem like what I was seeing culturally that was being defined as having a problem, or what I have even experienced in my own household with my family. And, the way I drank, I didn't get tanked. I just wanted to have a nice buzz, all day long. And that too, it's I wasn't out of control. I didn't black out, I didn't throw up. I didn't like to be that uncomfortable. I just wanted to be buzzed pretty much all the time. And so but it's funny is now I look back at it. I look back at the way I thought, the way I was, and I have no doubt in my mind that I had a problem, and life is so much better now. I am so happy that I did that. I just wanted to share that because I think for people listening, I'm sure there are people out there who are oh, is this a problem? And deep down, you probably know it is, but it's really, really hard in our society. So, it might not look like how you see it on TV or what you're seeing on the street corners.
Exactly. And I think, for me, most of my nights were like you were explaining. It was I just wanted to keep that same buzz. And what I was noticing for me was that it took more alcohol for me to get that buzz.
Maintain that buzz.
As the night wore on, I would like kind of reach this point where I would just keep drinking. And, you know, some nights I would get kind of drunk, and it was at that point, like everybody was already in bed. But most nights it was just like you were saying, like it was just this very heavy buzz. And for me, it was like, I just wanted to check out. Like I just wanted like a mini vacation. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
I couldn't be with, like, I have very similar feelings to what you were saying. Is like, I was so overstimulated. I was a little bit bored, you know, just like so many things wrapped up in my identity. And like, I mean, old triggers from old stuff. I just I couldn't deal with life.
Yeah.
I couldn't, it was just too hard. All of it was too much for me. So thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners do too. So let's move and talk about recovery. I'm sure so many people have heard me say, I think that sobriety and recovery are two very different things. I think that you can get sober, but recovery is something else. So what does recovery look like for you?
So for me, you know, recovery looks like being able to be in my body and be with myself and not need anybody's approval, a glass of wine, you know, like to feel like I look great. Like I think it's not just the booze. Like for me, it's like, it's like we call it Satnam in Kundalini. It's like this connection with yourself. And, you know, for me, that's what it's really about. And so, you know, like just recently, I just finished, we kind of talked about how I've been making a lot of changes in my life and really letting go of some things that were really deeply attached to my identity. And it was a really difficult process for me to let those things go. But what I realize is that there are things in our lives that we tolerate, and then we don't realize that we're tolerating them, but we use outside substances to do it, like to get us through. And for me, it wasn't booze, but it was like shopping. It was buying things. And I really noticed it. I was aware and I was like, wow, you know, these are really cute outfits, but why am I so obsessed with when the Amazon.com box is coming? And so, you know, what it really took for me was to make those difficult decisions, to make those changes that are in line with who I really am, and to face that. And it's difficult, but now I'm sitting here feeling so peaceful, so happy, so ready to wake up. My husband was just this morning, he's like, wow, you're not sleeping as much as you used to. Like, what's going on with you? Like, and I think that's what it is for me. That's what this means. This change means, is being able to get connected with yourself and to listen to yourself and to not just tolerate and get through your life, but to have a relationship with yourself in a way that allows you to feel heard, to appreciate yourself, to know yourself, so that you don't need those things outside of yourself to feel worthy, to feel like you deserve to exist.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I wonder, though, for a lot of people listening who, you know, this might be a wake up call for them, or maybe they even have recently got sober. I think it's a different story for you and I, who do this work for a living and who are immersed in it. But for someone who's not, what kind of advice can you give for somebody who wants to quit drinking? Like, we all know that there is 12-step programs that are free that you can look up in your area and go to. And that's how I stayed sober for the first couple of years in my life. And I think it looked a little bit different for you. Can you tell the listeners, what advice would you give for somebody who's trying to get sober and stay sober?
I think that a big part of it has to do with support. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that, so, you know, for me, like the biggest thing that set me on the path to sobriety was really when I was able to talk to other people. And I remember really the first conversation I had about this was with you, Andrea. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it was like, I talked to my dad, you know, and that was a big deal, like to tell my dad. And then, you know, being able to not be sort of quiet and not be secretive about it and find a community. And, you know, for me, the thing I think that is really difficult is that when we're drinking, we create a life around that. Yeah. We have friends around that. We have activities around that. And, so, and again, my work really has to do with us needing that belonging, right? And so what's really difficult, because this is such a primal need for us, is when we change our behavior that dramatically and those relationships no longer work the same way. Those social activities no longer work or look the same. And so I think this is this is huge for people. And so what you have to understand is that you really, whether it's AA or whether it's something else, you have to create a network of support. You can't do this in secret.
Right.
You have to find people who are going to support you. And so for me, I didn't go to a lot of the traditional AA meetings, although I do occasionally, but, finding community for me looked like finding, Tommy Rosen was great and I love his work, and he talks about recovery, and he does talk about 12 steps, but he also talks about yoga, and that really appeals to me. And so I did a lot of his events, and I do online meetings, but it's also just having relationships with people like you and people like my dad or others who understand, or even if they don't understand it completely, you can connect, you can tell them the truth. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's really about understanding that your life is going to change. I did lose friends. I don't have the same kinds of activities that I did before, but it's gotten so much better.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And I think I really want to underscore that you can't do it by yourself. You can certainly try. And I think that that's one of those things that if you are adamant about trying, then please go for it. I think some of us need to learn lessons the hard way. I'm one of those people. But I think that if you do try by yourself and it ends up not working out, I just want you to not think that something's wrong with you. I think this road is not meant to be done alone. And I think if nothing else, like 12-step meetings, you can find people who will listen to your story and they'll get it. I think there's nothing better than going to a recovery meeting and telling your story and seeing people's heads nod, where if you were to tell that story to your partner who drinks normally, they don't get it. And that was hard for me in early recovery, because I wanted my husband to get it so badly and he didn't. And then it finally dawned on me, it's not his job. Yeah. And it also dawned on me that the only reason he would totally get it is if he was an addict. And I don't want him to be. Mm-hmm. And I think, it's enough that I am and trying to navigate that. But for some miracle, he's not. And I think that the relationships that I forged in early recovery saved my ass. And I am eternally grateful for them. So what I'm going to do is in the show notes, if anyone is really struggling, and I know that there are some people who say, I just cannot, maybe you're a prominent figure in your community and you just can't do it. There are some online options that I will put in the show notes that I have found really helpful. There's actually a Facebook group that I've sent some clients to where you can meet, this mostly other women, where you can meet other women and tell your story and get some support. Cause I think that, I don't know if this was the case for you, but when I first called Courtney, even though I knew she had a lot of recovery, I was so afraid that she was going to gasp and be like, you?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you felt that way, coming to me about your story, but it was so nice to just have her be oh, okay.
Totally. Totally. I did not want to. I didn't want to come to you. But, that's the thing. That's the scary action, right, that I talked about. When it comes to getting out of your discomfort zone, to be successful in whatever way, however you define it, it's it really does mean that you have to do scary stuff. Right. And for me, talking to you was so vulnerable. It was so vulnerable. And it was really important. And I'm really glad that I did. I can't control that. I didn't want you to think I looked weak. I didn't want you to think, I don't know. I just didn't want to have you see me in this way. Yeah,
I hear that. And it's interesting. It's such, everyone knows I love Brené's work and facilitate her work. And this is really the definition of vulnerability, is that we walk into these quote unquote arenas of vulnerability and we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And we are so afraid of being rejected, we all have these fears of how we're going to be perceived by others. Speaking of approval addiction, we're coming full circle here. But what's interesting is that I was honored to hear your story. I was absolutely 100% honored and grateful that you came to me, that you trusted me enough to hear such just a story that came from your heart, and you were suffering, and that I could help you and hold the space to support you. So that's really, and not to say like, we're not telling people like, just go run out and tell like your hairdresser about it.
Right.
It has to be someone that has earned the right to hear your story. And that's where these online groups can be helpful, and especially recovery meetings.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. And I just really appreciate you and the work that you do in the world.
Likewise, Andrea. And it is an honor. Thank you.
So for those of you that do want to attend the workshop that Amy is putting on, it's ifeellikeafraud.com/Andrea. And again, all of that's in the show notes, and I will have resources for recovery in the show notes. And until next time, Ass Kickers, I will see you out in cyberspace. Bye-bye.